it is my pleasure to now introduce who will be your panel moderator and who is my boss, City Councilmember Gabriela Santiago-Romero, Councilwoman for District 6, as I mentioned. And Councilwoman Santiago-Romero was elected to become Detroit's first out woman LGBTQ Detroit council member. She's the first Latina to ever chair a city council committee, which happens to be the Public Health and Safety Committee. She also sits on the Budget, Finance, and Audit Standing Committee. She's an alumna of University of Detroit Mercy, as well as the University of Michigan, where she holds a Master of Social Work. She immigrated here from Jalisco, Mexico, but is a lifelong Southwest Detroit resident. And thank you so much for agreeing to be our moderator today. Please take it away, Councilwoman. I am going to give you the floor to just make some remarks and let you also introduce the rest of our guests.
Thanks, Hank. I'm incredibly excited about this conversation. Thank you to the ERG for putting this together. It's inspiring to see our city government embrace our LGBTQ community and our allies. I'm honored and nervous to moderate this panel, only because I am a huge fan of both of our speakers, and they're both a pretty big deal. So thank you so much for our Senator McMorrow, for your bravery and for your relentless advocacy for our queer community. And I'm completely fangirling over our AG, the most powerful queer woman of the states. So with that, I will jump in to briefly introduce themselves and their bios. If we go over to the next screen, I can briefly introduce our Attorney General, Dana Nessel, who's Michigan's 54th Attorney General. She's the first openly gay queer person elected to citywide office in Michigan. She's the former criminal prosecutor and civil rights attorney. She launched a new hate crime unit within the criminal division of the Department of Attorney General in 2019. She is a University of Michigan alum and Wayne State University Law School alum. And she resides in Southeast Michigan with her wife, Alina, along with their twin sons, Alex and Zach. So attorney, thank you so much for joining us. AG, thank you so much for joining us. We are honored to have you with us. And I will introduce briefly our second guest before turning the floor over to both of you. So our second guest today is State Senator Melissa McMorrow. She is over District 13. She was elected in 2018 to the Michigan State Senate. The committees that she serves under the Economic and Small Business Developments, Energy and Technology, Insurance and Banking. She is a University of Notre Dame alum. And she resides in Royal Oak with her husband, Ray, their daughter, Noah, and their rescue dog, Detroit. And I believe one of her favorite quotes here is, "Hate will only win if people let me stand by and let it happen," along with "we will not let hate win." So I will now turn it over to our Attorney General. I believe if you'd like to share brief remarks. Oh, I'm going to pause before I keep going because Hank has something to correct me on, probably.
No. Quick announcement. Just wanted to let everyone know, for the audience and for also our panelists, to know that this meeting is going to be recorded. It's also live streaming to Facebook and Channel 10. And that's it.
Thanks, Hank. With that, I will now turn it over to our AG.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to participate. I'm happy to be there virtually. I'm actually thinking now that I'm a little bitter that Mallory has a catchphrase and I don't have one, and now I have to think up one, because I guess I haven't really put whole lot of thought into that. But I'm gonna go with something for sure. But anyway, it's great to be here, and I'm excited for the conversation, and I'm happy to be here with Senator McMorrow, who has been a real star and a champion for the LGBTQ community and a fantastic ally to have. And, we need people in the community to work really hard on behalf of us, but equally as important are allies like Senator McMorrow. So I'm really excited to do this panel with her today.
Thank you, AG. Senator?
Thank you. It's always a lot of fun and an honor to be alongside AG Nessel, one of the funniest statewide elected officials in the country. I always brag to our national counterparts. You wish your AG had a sense of humor like ours does, but I'm State Senator Melissa McMorrow, and I'm really proud to be here today because, as my colleague Jeremy Moss has reminded us a lot lately, especially this month, it is a celebration, but right now, especially with the completely unfounded attacks on the LGBTQ community. And frankly, anybody who dares to stand up and say that attacks on the community are unacceptable. It's really important that this year, especially, we recommit ourselves not only to celebrating, but to what the work looks like. And from my perspective, as a straight white Christian married suburban mom, as you may have heard me say a few weeks ago, this is important to my daughter's future. I want her to grow up in a place where she can be whoever she's going to be and she feels welcome. And it's also just important to the entire Metro Detroit region that we are viewed as welcoming and accepting and diverse. And I have certainly heard stories of people who have left the state of Michigan for that exact reason, because we are not welcoming, because we are one of the worst in the country when it comes to hate crimes, particularly against the LGBTQ community. So as we look forward to the future of our state, this is about economic development. This is about doing the right thing to make sure that Michigan is a place where everybody feels comfortable being who they are, that residents feel like this is a place where they can stay and raise their families and be supported, and that people from around the country will want to flock to in the ways that they have for generations for opportunity here in Michigan. So I'm really proud to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Senator. And you touched on a lot of things that we will be talking about today. We have some questions that we've drafted, so I'll go into those now before turning it over to our members to ask any of their questions. So if you're following us along live on Facebook, please feel free to leave a question just in the chats, and we'll make sure to be able to get to those towards the end. But to kick it off, AG Attorney Nessel, you are a trailblazer in office. Tell us about your priorities when you took the job. Can you give us some examples of policies and practices you have been able to influence as the AG to protect and support LGBTQ residents in Michigan?
Well, firstly, I was coming into an office that was very hateful, quite honestly, when it came to LGBT rights issues, and was on the polar opposite side of everything that I wanted it to be on. So I did have a number of things I wanted to do when I got into office, but what I found myself doing the most in the beginning was having to issue spot all the cases where Attorney General Bill Schuette had taken anti-LGBT stances. And boy, there were a lot of them, and it was actually hard to identify all of them. And within the first, I would say, month of taking office, I actually got a call from the Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court, Bridget McCormack, and she said, "Hey, listen, there's a case that's going to be argued on Thursday. Are you sure you want to proceed with this?" And I was like, "What case?" And it was a case that came out of our Child and Youth Services division, where we were representing a county, a small county on the west side of the state. And the position that our department was taking was that a parent, a mother, should have her parental rights terminated because she was raising her trans child in a gender affirming manner. That's the position that my office was taking. And remember, as soon as you get into office, everywhere where it says Bill Schuette, it switches over to Dana Nessel as the party. So that's my name on that case. But just no one had alerted my attention to it. So I was like, oh my God, dismiss, like we have to get out of that case. And we had to do it last minute. But there were so many cases where so many horrible arguments were being made. And I actually remember having to call up all of my divisions that handled employment issues. And remember, we represent every department in the state. We represent MDOC and DHHS, and I mean, all of those departments. And I had to say, do we have any cases we are making the claim that a case should be dismissed because a person, because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, that they had no protection under the law, because I said I wouldn't make that argument. I would make the argument if they were a bad employee, but I wouldn't say that they had no right to sue just because it was all right to fire somebody for that purpose. And in fact, Governor Whitmer, when she took office, one of her first directives was, we're not going to be discriminating in Michigan government anymore. So even in representing my client agencies, I felt okay doing that, but it was a matter of the fact that these arguments were routinely made. So I had a lot of things I wanted to do to move forward, but first I had to stop us from moving backwards. And frankly, could you imagine how embarrassing that would be for me if here my name is appearing on a brief where the argument is being made that someone deserved to get fired because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. After we got through with that, I did about a million things to try to move us forward. And I can go into more detail about all of those things because there's a lot of them. But one of the things that I'm most proud of is, I brought up in June of 2019, my first year in office, we took a giant pride flag and I put it next to the Michigan and United States flags in the lobby for Pride Month. And then I think my staff was afraid to take it down. Maybe they thought I'd get mad. And then it's just been there ever since. So it's Pride year round at the Department of Attorney General. And it makes me especially happy because, of course, I litigated the DeBoer v. Snyder case against Bill Schuette and against his office. And the flag might be in front of Bill Schuette's face on the wall because it's got all the prior AGs on the wall. And his, of course, is the last. And that might be somehow where the flag ended up. So good times.
That's wonderful. Well, thank God for your leadership and that you're there and that you made sure that we weren't going backwards, that we were moving forward. We really appreciate your leadership and for all the work that you've done. Senator, I'm going to turn it over to you now. The state of Michigan is not the worst for LGBTQ legislation and rights, but we're definitely not the best. We have a lot of work to do. We still rank in the bottom tier of the state equality index prepared by the Human Rights Campaign. Are there any opportunity areas to tackle this issue and bring Michigan into line with states whose rights and protections extend to all citizens, including the LGBTQ community?
Absolutely. And we have seen very publicly efforts to amend the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act to explicitly include members of the LGBTQ community so that you can't be fired from your job after getting married or thrown out of your rental apartment. But right now, and I think AG Nessel really hit the nail on the head, there are really vicious attempts to take us backwards first. So a lot of our focus of those of us who are on the right side of history in the legislature right now is doing everything that we can, especially in divided government, where we know we have Governor Whitmer as a backstop who will veto any of this really damning, harmful legislation. But for those of us in the legislature to vocally fight against it as well. We know that legislation to prohibit trans kids from playing on the sports team that matches their gender identity has received many committee hearings. And I can tell you very personally that although we know that that won't be passed into law here in Michigan because of the governor, kids aren't immune to headlines and stories. And I was visiting a high school class in my district, kids 15, 16, 17 years old. And the first question was from a girl who I think was a freshman who said, I'm queer. Why do they hate us? And it's just that impact when you see all of these stories and headlines of bills really attacking such a small percentage of our community. And it just sends the message that you are not welcome in your own state. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do now is fight back against these bills and reveal them for what they are, which is just traditional scapegoating. The idea that somehow the solution to gas prices or inflation is banning 2 kids per year from playing on a sports team with their friends is absolutely ludicrous. So that's a lot of the work that we are doing as well. We know that our colleagues are planning to introduce legislation built off of Florida's Don't Say Gay bill that hasn't come yet, but we're preparing for that. Hopefully we get beyond this phase and we can be more proactive. We can amend Elliott Larson I've introduced legislation since taking office in 2019 to ban the active so-called conversion therapy on minors. And although we haven't gotten a hearing yet, I did get one Republican co-sponsor the last time I introduced it, so it's officially bipartisan. That bill has passed into law in at least 13 other states led by both Republicans and Democrats because it's child abuse. And hopefully we'll keep introducing it, building momentum so that we can be proactive instead of reactive. But it's going to take all of us really standing up against these attacks right now so that we can get to the next phase where we can be more proactive in continuing the progress that has been made over the past few decades.
Thank you, Senator. And your comment actually lays the groundwork for my next question for both of you. So LGBTQ protections and people are under attack in many states, as you mentioned. Recently, the Michigan State Legislature passed an education bill with language restricting participation in student sports for trans youth, as you mentioned. And you're correct, it's impacting students directly. And my office is working on a resolution to urge the state to expand the protections under the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. So exactly what you're mentioning, we are proposing. We are asking our core council what else we can do to strengthen our hate crime protections. And I'm working with our mayor and his administration to hire consultants to create a baseline assessment of where the city is internally and externally. I support the work that the Employee Resource Group is doing, our Civil Rights and Inclusion Opportunity Department as well. As a queer person, this is a very personal issue for me and for my office. We're a very queer office, but not all local leaders know where to start. How can cities set up protections when the state is failing us? Do you have any advice for us local officials? This is for both of you. And I can start with the Senator.
Absolutely. And I think the conversion therapy bill is a perfect example where, I've introduced this bill now for the past 3 years and we haven't even gotten a hearing. That's incredibly frustrating. But over the past 3.5 years, there have been, I believe, 14 local communities who have taken up the language from my bill, have worked with their city councils and commissions and passed local ordinances to ensure that it might not be statewide policy yet, but community by community, we are making change. And I was at the Berkeley City Council meeting when Berkeley adopted a similar ordinance. And again, I'm really moved every time there is a young person standing up and saying how much it means to them, because that's when you're making a difference. And there was a young girl with her mom who came out for that announcement to make that public statement. And especially for city employees, Detroit's an incredibly influential mover and shaker in the state. If policy can be changed within the city of Detroit, if we can use it as an example, that gives your counterparts in state legislature more tools to be able to put pressure back on our colleagues to say, look, our communities are hearing this directly from their residents. They are doing the work on the ground. And we've seen kind of that trickle up effect on so many issues, with marriage equality being one of them, as the Attorney General well knows. It started in the states and then it worked its way up to the US Supreme Court. So starting locally is a really fantastic way to start. And if your group or your organization doesn't know where to start, reach out to the Human Rights Campaign, reach out to Equality Michigan. There's a lot of really wonderful organizations that draft sample legislation and can put you in touch with the right people and reach out to. I'm sure the council member's office is a fantastic resource, and there's plenty of places you can start. And I know that people really appreciate when somebody, and I feel this again as a straight woman, stepping out of the comfort zone to say, this isn't my space, but I want to help. How can I do that? And when you reach your arm out, people are more than willing to bring you in and welcome you, which is a much better feeling than being on the other side, because it feels really like it takes a lot of effort to hate people. I don't understand why people do it.
For sure. Adrian?
So I look at this, I agree with everything that Senator McMorrow just said, but I look at this also from the legal perspective. Now, something that I did when I got into office was to take up some of these cases. And you might know that I argued in March a case called Roush World v. Michigan Department of Civil Rights. So in representing the Civil Rights Commission, we argued that the word sex, as it's utilized in the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act, actually encapsulates sexual orientation and gender identity. And we're waiting any minute now for the Michigan Supreme Court to come back with a ruling on that. one of the things that you can always do is file an amicus brief. When you see cases like that, you have, the city of Detroit file an amicus brief on behalf of the defendant in that case, which would have been the Department of Civil Rights. We also had a case, prior to becoming Attorney General, I was the president of a foundation called the Fair Michigan Foundation, which was an organization that investigated and prosecuted hate crimes against the LGBTQ community in concert with Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy. And one of the cases that we charged was a case called, People v. Rogers. And it was a trans woman who, was assaulted during the course of the event. And, we charged ethnic intimidation under the Ethnic Intimidation Act, even though just the word gender appeared and it didn't actually say gender identity. But our argument was gender identity was included. And, we ended up taking that case up. By the time we got to the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, I was at the AG's office, and I actually filed an amicus on behalf of the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office. But, we won that case. And so now gender identity is clearly included in the Ethnic Intimidation Act. But these are cases that when you spot these cases, that can also make a difference. I still believe it's absolutely essential that we amend both the Ethnic Intimidation Act and the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act to specifically include sexual orientation and gender identity. Why? Because the Supreme Court's going to change over time, right? Right now, we might have a Supreme Court that's amenable to that interpretation. 2 years from now, we might not. And so you really have to put it specifically into the law. It's a Band-Aid though, right? It's a temporary fix. I mean, so I'm happy that I've made these arguments, but it's important that we still make those changes into law. But in the meantime, get your municipality or your organization or an organization that you work with to file amicus briefs on behalf of these, important cases. And they do make a difference. And oftentimes what the courts will do, especially at the Supreme Court level, is they will allow an amici to have some of the time. So they'll say, we're going to give you 5 minutes or 10 minutes to argue, in response to whatever the plaintiff or the defendant has said. So it really does matter. And it just shows that there's more support for that position. And also, we have page limits. So there's only so much that we can say. Sometimes we'll make a legal argument, and then it would be up to another group or organization or an amici to make a policy argument that really, we can't make as part of our legal argument, but it's important for the court to know what that policy is.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That is incredibly helpful for us. We're taking notes. Definitely we'll be looking into that and utilizing that tool some more. This next question is for both of you again. And we also know that it is not just LGBTQ rights that are under assault. There are real fears about the future of our autonomy over our bodies this year with the consideration of the new interruption of abortion rights by overturning Roe versus Wade. How do you think the struggles for dignity and autonomy in the LGBTQ community are linked with the struggles for civil and human rights? AG, I'll start with you this time.
I'm not looking at it as a human rights issue, even though it definitely is one, as much as I am a legal issue. And the problem is this: the Roe decision, the analysis of the due process clause through the 14th Amendment as it applies to the states and all of that. I mean, these right to privacy cases, there are a number of them. And unfortunately, they don't just involve abortion and birth control, which they do, the penumbra of rights. They also involve every judicial right ever provided to the LGBTQ community. So that's the sodomy laws, it's marriage equality, and there are other rulings that were relied specifically on the exact same theory that if we see a decision that comes down in Dobbs that's anything like the leaked opinion, it will completely dismantle that. And so my considerable fear is that you will see, for instance, we're always talking about marriage equality, which of course is incredibly important. But I mean, what people don't realize is the sodomy laws are still on the books. And what that means is that for, intimacy between partners in a same-sex couple, that's a 15-year offense in Michigan, still on the books. Same as forcible rape. It's the same penalty. And I know that sounds crazy, but that could be a prosecutable offense. And same-sex marriage, what's so concerning about it is if Obergefell is overturned, which I truly believe, based on what I'm seeing from that court, that it's only a matter of time before it is. And remember, it was only a 5-4 decision. It wasn't like it was a 9-0 decision or something. And it's only from, they're overturning stuff from 50 years ago. You can bet they'll turn things over from 7 years ago, right? So if that happens, we have 2 laws on the books making same-sex marriage illegal. One is a statute, which is, to repeal a statute, you just need a majority. I don't want to say just need, because as Mallory knows, that's no small feat, getting a majority in the House and Senate and the governor's office. But we also have a constitutional amendment, which is much harder, and it's going to require, there's various ways to do it, but either the legislature is going to have to put that up for a vote, which they just did with another measure that's we're going to be voting on in November, or we're going to have to do what we are doing right now with the Reproductive Freedom for All ballot proposal, and we'll have to get the equivalent of 10% of whatever the number of people are who vote for governor this year, and then put that on a ballot proposal for future years and constitutionally codify it so that people in Michigan can know that they will have the right to same-sex marriage. But I got to tell you, tough times are definitely ahead, because we've been relying on the Supreme Court, not just for marriage rights, but also for adoption rights, because adoption rights for same-sex couples are directly linked to marriage rights. In Michigan, you can't jointly adopt or do a second parent adoption without being a married couple. Can't be a married couple if same-sex marriage is illegal and you're 2 people of the same gender or sex. So that's all bad news. But the good news is, for instance, with reproductive freedom, I think that the ballot proposal will make the ballot, and I think it's going to pass. And we can do the same thing with other things as well, as long as people participate as they should and as they need to.
Thank you, AG. This just reminds me of freedom is a constant struggle, so is justice. So the fight needs to continue, and excited that we're having this conversation for folks to know what we're up against. Senator?
Yeah, I want to just expand on that too, because I think that all of these issues, they point to the importance of all branches of government. And I think our abortion law is a perfect, in a horrible way, perfect example of that. So Michigan's 1931 abortion law, which will go into effect immediately if Roe falls. However, there's been a ruling to stay the enforcement of it. That makes abortion a felony, providing an abortion a felony with a minimum of 4 years in prison. So imagine, one of the very real life scenarios is if you are the mother of a daughter who is raped and you get a medication abortion, your mom is sent to jail. And overnight, Michigan becomes one of the most extreme states in the entire country. And I have introduced legislation commonly known as the Reproductive Health Act to codify abortion access and reproductive rights into law. And I think for a long time, people look at legislation like this and they kind of think, well, why do we need that? Because we have Roe. And I think what this horrifying reality shows us is, as the Attorney General mentioned, courts change and these opinions change, and precedent, we thought it was set in stone. It very clearly isn't. And there was a quote from one of our Republican colleagues in the House recently who, when asked about Roe falling, she said something to the effect of, nobody wants to go back to the 1931 law. But the legislature also hasn't done anything proactive to take up any new legislation. So that's the reality as we go back to that law. And that law was originally written in 1847. It was amended in 1931 to add the felony aspect of it. So this is why, right now I'm really proud of Michigan for going at this issue, and frankly, all of the issues that are the domino effect if and when Roe falls, for going at this on all fronts, in the legislature, via a ballot initiative, in the courts. Depending on which county you live in, we have some prosecutors who will very directly read the letter of the law and go after women, girls, doctors, abortion providers, and then as other opinions fall, LGBTQ couples, parents who are providing gender affirming therapy for their kids, you name it, the gates are kind of wide open. And we're going to have this patchwork effect in Michigan of really who your local prosecutor is, and then who, our statewide attorney general is. And again, all of this changes. We're all temporary in these roles, but I think it really highlights the importance of each of the branches. And it's not enough to say, well, that's handled in the courts, we're good. We've got to go at it on all fronts and pretty consistently, and realize that nothing is permanent. We are all in our roles that we have been elected to or hired in these roles temporarily. What are we going to do with this time to hopefully leave it a little bit better for the people who come after us?
Yeah, and just to add to that for a second, I think it's important to know the Mallory's Republican colleagues intervened in the Planned Parenthood lawsuit in order to defend the 1931 law. So they might say, well, nobody wants to go back to the 1931 law, and yet they're defending it in court. So maybe they do really
and they're spending $750,000 of taxpayer dollars to defend against something that a majority of Michiganders do not want.
And just to add on to that, I'm facing budget cuts in my office for things like some of our widespread sexual assault and sexual abuse investigations. And we actually just lost 2 victims advocates and several investigators. These are people who were investigating, actual predators who are out there, many who have multiple victims, but because that money instead is going to go towards trying to support this 1931, one of the most draconian laws in the nation, the money comes from other places for that. And one last thing that I will add, Senator, is that I know that the widespread feeling is that the 1800s law was replaced by the 1931 law, but some of our analysis actually shows it wasn't actually replaced. It's in addition to. So that means that there's a manslaughter bill that actually is still technically on the books. The language is a little bit different, but I don't think that that's instead of. I think that's in addition to. So our problems are even worse, I think, than people think.
I agree, and really appreciate you both for sharing. Senator, your comments about prosecutors makes me also realize that we have some good prosecutors. Washington County, I think that if people were to organize around a commitment to make sure that we are protecting folks that provide and receive abortions, that could potentially happen. So it does matter. Elections do have consequences, and it could be for the best. So there is hope. It's just a lot of work, and we do have to come together. But really appreciate you highlighting that. Want to encourage folks, employees from the city of Detroit, if you have any questions, to drop them in the chat now. I have 2 more final questions for our guests before kicking it over to our attendees to ask your questions. My final question for the both of you is a pretty serious one, and I love how the flow of the conversation has been going, because it's something that it's been touched on by our AG, and that is that we do have a crisis of violence, specifically a crisis of violence against trans women in our community. This is most profound in our Black community, in our Black and Brown women that are being targeted. How can we better protect trans women of color through policy and legislation? Here, I will kick it off with our senator first.
Yeah, I think that it's it's horrifying every time you hear one of these stories. And again, it's so much anger and hatred and fear targeted at so few and often the most vulnerable. So number one is funding, making sure we are funding organizations that provide a safe space and resources like the Ruth Ellis Center, like Affirmations, because we have to acknowledge the reality right now is that it is very dangerous for trans women and especially trans women of color. So making sure those organizations are able to do their very necessary work. And then hopefully, again, it goes back to my earlier comment of we get past this time of really just trying to stop all of these efforts to attack and go backwards and can get into a place where we are proactive. And this gets into an intersection of critical issues in the legislature related to criminal justice reform. In the wake of the killing of George Floyd in the Senate, we unanimously passed a bill package related to police reform, and that package died in the House that term. There has continued to be bipartisan legislation pushed on criminal justice reform, especially knowing that the Black and Brown community are targeted at higher rates, and that's only magnified if you also happen to be a trans woman. And then it's amending Elliott Larson, and then it's putting these laws into place, and it's really just, saying loud and clear, targeting other people is not going to solve your problem. And I think that is where a lot of us can come together and say that, if all of the sudden, those two trans kids can't play sports, or, there is a trans woman of color who's using your bathroom, I don't understand why everybody is so obsessed with everybody else's genitals or where everybody goes to the bathroom. But that is not going to solve gas prices, inflation. It is doing nothing to make, people like me, my life will be exactly the same the next day. Nothing will be improved, nothing will be any worse, but it will devastate the friends and family of very few people. And I think that is a message we can all carry forward. But, in the short term, understanding the climate that we're in, it's funding and making sure that trans women of color have a safe place to go and the resources they need.
Thank you, Senator. Also, don't understand why we have to gender bathrooms. We don't have a gendered bathroom in our home. Anyways, AG, your thoughts on what we should be doing?
Well, so what I've tried to do in my office is, to utilize our resources to make sure that we are investigating and prosecuting cases where trans people, where LGBTQ people have been assaulted, or where there's even, property damage, or where there's threats. But a lot of that involves also making sure that these communities aren't afraid to report it to law enforcement. That's one of the biggest challenges that we have. And so that really means doing a lot of outreach, and it has to be a situation where the community feels safe working with us. We put into my office a transgender interaction policy. And the reason we did that is because we had been seeing in police reports, when witnesses took the stand, trans people being misgendered. And like, already you're the victim of a crime. And now someone's calling you by the wrong name. Somebody is using, pronouns that are offensive to you. That's not you should have seen some of the police reports that I would see before we created this Fair Michigan, foundation, Fair, Justice Project. Some of these reports were just horrific, or just even watching the videotapes of the interaction between the police officers and the community. And there's no wonder that the community didn't feel safe, making these reports, or feel like the police were going to do anything about it. And it really changed everything. So we started to do training programs to police departments and prosecutors' offices all over the state. And suddenly people started coming forward. And I think one of the happiest days for me was seeing a tape of a police officer, I think at Highland Park, talking to a trans woman and his partner. And saying, and the partner, I think, had made some disparaging remark, and that officer said, "Whoa, we can't talk to trans people like that anymore. That's not allowed." And it was one officer correcting another officer saying, "We don't do that here anymore." And I was like, "Oh my God, what a difference," And so it mattered. But the other thing that matters beyond the community feeling safe, is having people, frankly, like Senator McMorrow, who are not members of the community, but are willing to be, really significant advocates for us, because people will always say, well, this is, of course you're going to speak out on your own behalf, but, for normal people, for regular people, they're not going to accept that. And so it's important to have people like Senator McMorrow, but not just in everyday life, but also in leadership roles. And what I mean by that is some of these really horrific bills that we're seeing emerge in other states and also here in Michigan. For instance, Senator McMorrow is in the minority, and that's why these bills get a hearing. And yes, the senator and her colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle can make some amazing, righteously indignant speeches in opposition to these horrible bills. But guess what? If Senator McMorrow was in the majority, these bills would never get a hearing in the first place. I mean, they could propose it, and then then Mallory could send them to die somewhere, and we would never hear about them again. And I mean, honestly, so it would not get that kind of attention. It would not get that kind of publicity. So the long and the short of it is electing people in we have a phenomenal governor who's a great ally to the community. We have a phenomenal Secretary of State who's a great ally to the community. I am a member of the community. But we need, for the legislature, we really have to make sure that whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, that you have to be a good ally. And let me say something that was just kind of struck me as interesting. A few days ago, I had a conversation with the wife of one of Senator McMorrow's Republican colleagues. And I was really surprised because this particular Republican comes from a very red area, but had co-signed on or co-sponsored the Pride Month resolution, one of a few Republicans to do that. And I was like, well, how great, how enlightened of this senator from this very red district. And his wife then said to me, we have a child that's gay. And I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. So when it's your kid, then it's different. But if it's somebody else's kid, then not so much. And it has to be, right? It can't just be when it's a member of your family that you suddenly start caring about people. Just like we should care about everybody's health insurance, and we should care about everybody's opportunity to have an education. We should care about everybody's water being clean. We should care about all people, irrespective, and not just if they happen, to be a member of our immediate family. And that's really what matters. And that is why it's so important, like I said, to have people, like Senator McMorrow be in the majority, be dictating what laws get hearings, what laws get passed, and not just fighting on the defense all the time, which is honestly really much of what they do right now.
100%. Thank you, AG, for the work that you've done and for mentioning those insights as to how folks move inside the legislation, but completely agree wholeheartedly that we need more folks like Senator McMorrow. And actually, Senator, I have one final question, and it's for you. Before turning it over for a few more questions from our employees. And to kick it off, we want to just mention that you went viral online for being an ally to our community. I'm sure that was fun. So just thank you so much for standing up for what you know to be right, and for being a model, as has been mentioned, a model for what it looks like to support us amongst your colleagues. Given the mounting list of states' violations against LGBTQ residents, from Don't Say Gay in Florida to blocking transgender care for youth in Texas, do you have advice for other allies to put themselves on record for when it really counts? Why should legislators put themselves on the line?
Yeah, when I gave a speech I gave a few weeks ago, I did not expect that 16 million plus people would watch it, but here we are. And my hope is that it struck a nerve, and it struck a nerve in a way that should empower a lot more people like me. I was very intentional in defining myself as a member of the majority group. I am a straight white Christian married suburban mom. And as we've seen places like Virginia, places where Glenn Youngkin got elected governor on an anti-LGBTQ, CRT kind of fear-mongering platform, It was specifically targeting the frustration of white suburban moms who were rightly frustrated after, 2 years of a pandemic and school closures and trying to balance work and school and, suddenly being teachers thrown on top of everything. I think I wanted to give people like me space to say, you have every right to feel burned out and frustrated over the past 2 years, but we have to get off the sidelines now because we decide what types of communities we live in, because the only way that these attacks work is when people like me sit back and say, ooh, it's not attacking me. It's not my problem. I'm going to sit this one out. Just because you're okay doesn't mean this is okay. And I think that too often, either because we're tired or for fear of maybe saying the wrong thing, we say nothing. And it's unacceptable. And we have to step up right now. So that's my hope, is that more people who are in a position like me feel comfortable. And I can say, based on the feedback that we've gotten over the past few weeks, it is just the most heartwarming experience I've ever had. People are writing me their life story in letters and saying how much it meant to them from all over Michigan, all over the country, and all over the world. So if you do the right thing, people have your back, and then you make a lot more friends, which is a pretty damn good place to be in. So don't be afraid to do it.
Yeah, well, you know what, Mallory's speech, did just recently go viral, that incredible speech that she gave, but she's been proposing, laws that advance the rights of the community since she first got into office. That one just happened to catch fire, but she's been doing it since the minute that, she got sworn into office. And that's the thing, right? It's not just, is this going to get me a moment of fame? Mallory wasn't jumping on the bandwagon. She created the bandwagon. She was already a part of it. She just happened to give a hell of a speech one day.
No, well, thank you for the creation of that wagon. We appreciate it. We hope more people join in. Join on in. I will now hand it over to Hank, who's going to help facilitate the questions from our employees. But thank you all so much for your responses to the questions that we had prepared for you.
That was truly excellent. Thank you so much. And Councilwoman, you're welcome to stay on screen. And I think that maybe some of these you'd like to chime into as well. So we have 7 questions right now in the chat. I don't think, given time, that we're going to get to all of them, but I will try to just pick out a few of them. The first one I'll highlight is pretty straightforward. This comes from Brandon Wilson. What happens if Elliot Larson is amended? Could we get an explanation of what that means in practical terms, and what would prevent future Attorney General offices from backtracking on that type of improvement?
Is that for me or for the senator?
That could
Attorney
be
General. I think that's a you question.
Oh, okay.
Let's direct that one at you.
All right. So, So let's start with if Roush World, if we're successful, because that could be any day now. And if we are successful, what it means, we already have, for the purposes of employment, if you work for a company that is over 15 people, you're already covered from an employment perspective. But if you look at all of the other types of conduct that's covered under Elliot Larson, so we're talking about employment, education, housing, public accommodations. For any size business that you're looking at, LGBTQ people will, be insulated from discrimination in that they can file a lawsuit in circuit court or district court, of course, depending on how much money you're talking about, in the event that you're discriminated against in any of those things. So that's whether somebody refuses to serve you a cup of coffee at a diner, or whether that's somebody who won't rent you an apartment, or somebody who terminates you from a job or won't consider you for a job based on those suspect classes. But as we talked about, even if I'm successful in that endeavor, and I'm knocking on a lot of wood over here and hoping that that I will be, then again, it can still change later. But it can't. I mean, an attorney general isn't the one who generally brings one of those cases, it would be you can make a complaint with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, or you can just sue yourself. You can find yourself an attorney and sue for any of those reasons. But again, if we have a different Supreme Court that makes a different decision in the years to come, then we will revert back. And that is why it's so important that that language be specifically added in, because once it's added in, no court can say, well, I don't see it. I just see sex and gender. I don't see sexual orientation and gender identity. So it's still important to add that language. But again, any day now, we'll see what the Michigan Supreme Court says about Roush World. Obviously, if I lose, there'll still be protections in employment, but just for the larger size businesses and companies, and for these small businesses, still no protection.
Thank you so much. I'm going to highlight second question from Adaora Zike. And this is a question for the panel. Many of our Black LGBTQIA+ youth in Detroit face structural violence and inter-community discrimination, especially in regard to housing, quality of care, and safety in gentrifying neighborhoods. They've also expressed that terms like BIPOC diminishes inequity and hate crimes faced specifically by Black identifying LGBTQIA+ people. Is the state dedicating resources specifically for Black LGBTQIA+ housing, organizations, economic paths, and victim services? I know that this one may be more helpful if we had someone on from different departments within our state government, but if folks have something that they can add, resources that they know about to help answer the question, please go ahead.
I think that's for you, Mallory.
Yeah, I think this is another issue where, the answer is, I wish that there was. But the reality is, in the current makeup of the legislature, it's really hard to add an equity lens onto a lot of our policies. I know the lieutenant governor has really led the charge, especially throughout COVID-19, to work on race as a public health crisis. And then you also layer on LGBTQ identity on top of that. And we know that it makes it more complicated, adds a layer of discrimination. But to answer whether or not there's state policy specifically dedicated to that, the unfortunate answer is no, because in this current legislature, it's just not something that is considered. And again, we are often finding ourselves, those of us who are allies and believe in equity, trying to stop bad things from happening instead of proactively looking to expand protections and create protections for more people. So that is another one of those unfortunate instances where we are at a place right now where it's just kind of defense. Ideally, we get to a place, and this is a great plug, to checkmichigan.gov/vote to check on your voter registration, make sure all your friends and neighbors are registered to vote and vote in the primaries and the general elections. No matter who you are, just make sure you do it. But that is something to think about as you go into elections. Is this person at every level, from your city council up to the county, up to the state, going to think about equity and recognizing that just because a group gains more rights or protections doesn't mean that somebody like me loses them, and breaking out of that mentality so that we can ensure that every Michigander feels safe and protected and has the resources that they need.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for just one more question, and I'm going to group three together because they kind of get to the same thing, which is, how can people get involved? What can people do to be more proactive? Alicia asks, Amanpreet asks, is there anything we can do to facilitate getting the hearing for the conversion therapy bill? Renee asks, with the loss of investigators in the Attorney General's office, can we train advocates and people in the community to do the work? So how can folks, regular people like the employees who are participating in this panel listening, how can they get involved?
I can start on this one. This is my favorite question. So I think especially in this climate, it is so easy to be so overwhelmed by all of the news and all of the problems, and you almost you collapse because you don't know where to start. And I think everybody wants to be able to help on every issue. And I like to think about it, if you're trying to learn how to run a marathon and play a trombone and like be a great cook, you're never going to be great at all of those things. So my advice to anybody who wants to get involved in this space and become an advocate is pick one issue that you really care about and join an advocacy group. So for gun violence, for example, find an Everytown or Moms Demand Action group. If it's LGBTQ issues, join up with Equality Michigan, or being on this call is a great place to start. And then learn from that group how to advocate. We have citizen lobby days in Lansing where advocacy groups come to talk to us about issues. And I think that you are going to be much more impactful if you pick the one thing that really drives you and do that consistently. Keep showing up, because you're going to get better and better at learning how to advocate for that. And that is so much more impactful. If all of us were to pick one issue and show up consistently, we would be able to really change the dynamic of policies that are put forward. But that is a lot more impactful than filling out a bunch of change.org petitions that get sent off and go into an abyss. So, I know a lot of people just anger type on Twitter at the end of the day. Don't do that. Pick one group, pick one issue, and show up consistently, and you will undoubtedly make an impact.
Yeah, and I will just say this, I guess, in addition to that, and I know we've already talked about this, but there is nothing, as a community member, there's nothing that it will ever be even a fragment as important as you voting regularly and making sure, the internet, we have such easy access now to find out who is running for office at every level and what their standpoint is, what their policies are. Oftentimes, all you have to do is follow somebody on social media and you'll know exactly how they feel about the issues. But it's also getting everybody in your community to do the same. And what that means is, it means going out and volunteering, whether it's, mailing envelopes, or whether it's door knocking, or whether it's phone banking. Trust me when I tell you that we are in perilous times right now. And especially as it pertains to LGBTQ rights, we just got some of these rights. Some of them we're just in the process of hopefully getting, and we're already going to lose them. I saw some question in there about like, oh my God, what do we do about Obergefell? My answer sadly would be, well, if we're not going to go out and vote in large numbers, then I guess like get married right away so that you can be grandfathered in, like have your baby that you're going to have now and don't wait till later. Like you should not give advice to people that is, even if you're not sure about getting married, why don't you just go ahead and do it just in case? Like, that's not the kind of advice that anyone should be giving you. And we don't want to be in that position again, right? So, but what you can do is you can make sure that you and every single person is registered to vote, and you can bug them and say, hey, did you get your absentee ballot? Did you apply? And do that with every single person, like however many social media contacts you have. I don't even want to, it's going to make me feel old if I say like however many Facebook followers you have, and everyone will think I'm old for saying that. But, whatever it is, every single person and share it, right? When you see Mallory give an amazing speech like that, share it multiple times. Hey guys, have you heard this speech by this state senator? You guys should listen to her. Play it for your mom and your grandma, because you know what? They're going to like Mallory's speech too. And make sure that people are aware of the issues within your network. And I know there's a lot of people who will say like, oh, I don't want to talk politics, because, everybody has different viewpoints and, that's going to create difficulties in the relationship. These are our lives. I mean, there's nothing more important. Our freedoms, our democracy, our fundamental rights, they're all at stake. We're not talking about a difference in like tax policy that, may or may not impact you or may not impact you the rest of your life. These are the kinds of things that will matter forever. Trust me when I tell you that outside of your work and outside of taking care of your family, there is nothing more important that you could be doing right now than to educating people about our right to vote and our democracy. And, voting is like a muscle, right? Use it or lose it. We're on the cusp of losing it. So now's not the time to sit back and, watch your favorite Netflix show or whatever you watch on the TLC's channel, which should be 90 Day Fiance. It's an amazing show. But still, you should be making sure first and foremost that you're voting and that every single person is doing the same.
Thank you. Thanks, Hank. I see the time now. It's 5:01. I will give my response briefly and echo completely what's been shared already. For us here locally in Detroit, get involved with our ERG group. Even if you're not a part of the queer community, and Friends is there right on the name for you to join us, for you to learn. And I would echo learning. Voting is incredibly important. And as an organizer, I always have to say vote and organize and get engaged in your community and educate yourself and watch queer movies with your niece and nephew and have these discussions and read a book, read some good articles, written by trans and non-binary people, learn about the community, fully immerse yourself, even, if you're part of it or if you're an ally, because it makes a huge difference when it comes to the issues that we deal with every day. So absolutely vote, organize, get engaged locally, get engaged in your family, with your friends. If your friends say anything dumb, make any weird, dumb jokes, tell them that's not, it's not no homo anymore. It's all homo and it's okay. Like, do not make these comments and these questions and call them out. That's what I have to say about that. But for folks, we encourage you to get get involved. City of Detroit employees to get engaged with our employee resource group. Thank you so much to our Attorney General and to our State Senator for joining us, for taking the time off your very busy days, for the work that you do. We are incredibly grateful, and that we ask that you please continue to stay strong in the fight. We are there right along with you, even if it's at a different level. We are doing our part and will continue to do our parts. I just want to thank the ERG group for putting this together, for the work that you're doing. Hank, thank you so much for leading in this work in the policy arm, along with everybody else in the ERG group. I'm excited. I have hope. It's good to know the reality that we're dealing with, for us just to continue to brace ourselves, to work together, because this fight's going to continue. But I hope that we do it with love, with all the pride flags, with all the community, and with all of us being involved. So just thank you all so much. I hope that everyone has a good rest of your day and a good rest of your week. Happy Pride, everyone. And as our AG mentioned, it's Pride all year round. So enjoy, have a good evening, and thank you everyone so much again.
Thanks for having us.